The man just passed out in bed for 21 days and woke up to find that he was alone in the world. Nick, a geologist who lives in the forest, was speculating on a piece of ore when he was bitten by a venomous snake in his right hand. The pain of the laceration caused Nick to shiver, and he took out a knife, cut himself, sucked out the venom through his mouth, and the whole body went into a state of shock, and he had to leave the scene and hurry back to the cabin. He had to leave the scene and make his way back to the cabin, and after a long, hard run, he finally made it back to the house before he lost consciousness. As the toxin began to take hold of his body, his vision blurred until he couldn't see anything anymore. That night, in a state of trance, Nick thought he heard a knock on the door and the sound of a helicopter hovering. And he tried to scramble to his feet to see what was going on, but his body was still immobilized from the toxins, and he didn't know how long he would be in pain or how he would be able to see. How long did it take? Nick seems to have been woken up by hunger. He climbs out of bed, takes a few sips of water, and then slips into a deep coma once again. 21 days have passed, and the toxins in Nick's system have finally dissipated, and his body has regained its original look. After cleaning up and tidying up a bit, Nick decides to go into town to get some food, and by this time, his car is already covered in dust. But luckily, it still starts. And from the top of his head, Nick appears to be the only one running in the whole town. In fact, the world has changed. From an overlooking viewpoint, Nick's figure appeared to be a lonely one, and his car was the only one running in the whole town. In fact, the world had changed. Nick just didn't know it yet. But when he saw the dry bodies lying on the ground, it was obvious that the other guy had been dead for a long time, and the sight of them made Nick feel shocked. He rushed to check the surroundings, only to find out that the bodies were lying everywhere, and he noticed that in the square there was a sign with flashing words, "Global Outbreak." The world has erupted. A terrible plague has alerted all citizens to take precautions, and, thinking of the only family he had left, Nick headed for his parents' house, not seeing anyone or any cars along the way. Upon arriving, the place was silent, dead, and a bad feeling had set in. Nick rushed to his room to call out for his family, only to see his father dead in his bed, and his mother in a small room, taking pills and committing suicide. A blow that was too much to take in. The shock was too much for Nick to handle, and for a time he was overcome with pain, and he didn't know how long it would be before Nick decided to bury his parents. He dug a big hole in the backyard and buried the two old men together, and then Nick traveled the rest of the town to look for survivors. But everywhere he looked, there was silence. There was no life, and as soon as he stepped foot in the church, the sight of all the saints was so staggering that everyone was dead. Every single one of them looking expressionless, as if they were dead, and every single one of them looked like they had died. Everyone here was dead, and they all looked so expressionless, as if they died at the time of their death. Apparently, the so-called plague had come very suddenly, and the people had no time to fight back before they were all killed. As a geologist, Nick could understand the defiance with which such a disaster was bound to occur, but he didn't expect it to be as horrific as it was. Since there were no survivors to be found in the town, Nick decided to check out the nearby big city, and then, once again, he returned to the center of the town's supermarket, where he purchased a stockpile of survival supplies, including the necessary weapons and tools. On the way there, the radio continued to deliver bad news about the epidemic, which seemed to be rapidly consuming human civilization. Soon, Nick came to a huge suspension bridge, but it seemed to be blocked, and when he got out of the car, he looked at the ground and saw the bodies of soldiers, and it looked like the government was trying to prevent people from passing through.